The Tampa Bay Buccaneers finished the 2024 season with a 10-7 record and made the playoffs for the fifth straight year.
The Buccaneers conquer the South again for the fourth year in a row. Tampa Bay Buccaneers win the NFC South.
It was their fourth consecutive division title, but unfortunately their season ended in the wild card round as they lost to the Washington Commanders 23-20. It was a disappointing end to what was a very fun season at times, and despite the Bucs winning their fourth straight division title, it was anything but a smooth ride. Yes, Baker Mayfield threw 41 touchdowns and Bucky Irving was an electric young running back, but this team dealt with several setbacks and entered their Week 11 bye with a 4-6 record, having lost 4 straight games. What made the wildcard round loss so disappointing for Tampa was they finished the regular season on a 6-1 note, and in those final 7 games, averaged 31.9 points per game in the process. And obviously the end of the 24 season was disappointing, but with what we saw down the stretch of the 2024 season, I can't help but think this team is going to be a problem this year. They are going to be an absolute nuisance to play, and a lot of people are sleeping on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And when you sit back and look at this roster, truly what is the weak point? They're already a good team and they're going to improve in some areas from last year that should make them even better, like having a -5 turnover margin or having only 7 defensive interceptions over the course of an entire season. And in today's video, we're going to break down the 2025 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Before we start, if you could take a second and like the video, I would really appreciate it. It helps the channel tremendously. Now let's begin. And like we do with every team preview, we are starting today's video by who the Bucs brought in free agency and who they lost prior to the NFL draft. One of the biggest keys to success in a Todd Bowles defense is getting after the quarterback, and repeatedly. He's going to throw the kitchen sink and then some at you as a defensive coach, but one thing that held the Bucs back in 2024 was not being able to get home with one guy consistently. I know the Bucs finished tied for 6th in the NFL in sacks last year as they had 46 as a team, and despite Yaya Diaby leading the team with 65 pressures, he only had 4.5 sacks. And I do believe there is an art to finishing plays rather than just getting close to making a play. And obviously Yaya Diaby is not a bad player, I don't want that to be the takeaway, but it's not a coincidence Tampa went out and signed Haason Reddick to a 1-year $14 million deal. And for anyone who may remember, this deal was announced pretty much as soon as free agency started. It was one of, if not the very first signings in free agency, meaning Tampa wasn't messing around and they knew they needed to bring their guy home. And I like this signing for Tampa because they didn't have a number 2 edge rusher last year to consistently apply pressure. And Haason Reddick has proven that he can be that guy. It's a case-by-case basis for players that have down years, but I am willing to dismiss the 2024 season from Reddick because I think the talent is still there. And having Diaby, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, and Haason Reddick get after the quarterback is not going to be fun for opposing offensive lines this year. They also brought back Anthony Nelson, who is quietly entering year 7 with the Bucs, and a player who had 32 pressures last year. Tampa also brought back Greg Gaines, a veteran defensive tackle, who is going on year 3 with the Bucs, as well as Kyle Trask and Sterling Shepard. I was surprised linebacker Anthony Walker only received a 1-year, $1.4 million contract. Now, I know Walker has his flaws as a player, but I thought he would have received a $3 or $4 million deal rather than a sub-$2 million contract, meaning I thought this was good value for the Bucs. There is one underrated thing about Tampa that I don't think it's talked about nationally. Well, several things actually, as Tampa is a franchise that does not get talked about a lot, but they do a really good job of both paying and retaining their guys. You really don't hear about X player or Y player sitting out due to a contract dispute, and it's because they're a really well-run organization. So when they lose somebody in free agency, a lot of the time it's because they're a depth player or a team is going to overpay for who they are as a player because they need to desperately try and upgrade at that position. And Tampa lost center Robert Hainsey to Jacksonville in free agency as he signed a 3-year, $21 million contract and followed Liam Cohen to Duval. Tampa had just signed Ben Bredeson a year prior, and with Graham Barton and Cody Mock occupying the other 2 interior offensive line spots, well, the writing was on the wall for Hainsey. They also technically lost Joe Tryon, a former first-round pass rusher from Washington, and I thought there was a chance Tryon would eventually break out with the Bucs, but it never happened. The negatives within his game as a draft prospect are still there 4 years later, and consistency with him was always a big issue. And again, there's a reason Tampa let him walk, despite needing help at the second edge position, and even investing $14 million in Hassan Reddick to occupy that position. Outside of those two players, they only had two other players sign contracts for $2 million in average annual value, meaning they were not highly sought after free agents, and they both went to the Vikings in corner Tavierre Thomas and offensive tackle Justin Skule. Tampa's main free agent signing was, of course, Hassan Reddick, and I think this is a moderate risk because, remember, they gave him $14 million for what could be a very high reward. Now, with the 2025 Bucs defense, one of the biggest things we have to start with here is health. They had several players last year miss multiple games, and that was a big reason why the Bucs defense, in theory, underachieved relative to how good they actually are on paper. Now, we did discuss how underwhelming the edge rushers were last year, and I stand by that, but Antoine Winfield Jr. missing 8 games is both unfortunate and also going to inevitably affect the defense too. And to kind of hammer this point home even further, Tampa had just 2 players on their defense last year play 800 or more snaps in the regular season, which was the lowest in the division. Carolina had 3, Atlanta had 4, and New Orleans had 5. But even with the inconsistencies Tampa had in the starting lineup last year, I still thought they did a decent job, all things considered, at least factoring in the circumstances. They finished 19th in EPA defensively and only allowed 24 points or more just once in their final 9 games, playoffs included. And after their Week 11 bye, they only allowed 400 yards or more in a game, a grand total of 0 times. And what I do think was kind of unfortunate for Tampa, at least from a national media perspective, for a team that already does not get discussed a lot by the national media, is Kirk Cousins had the best game of his 14-year career against them on primetime, and they also played the Ravens and Chiefs on primetime, which isn't exactly favorable for Tampa. They gave up 41 points and over 500 yards to the Ravens, and naturally that's going to do damage to your reputation or how people perceive you as a team. But this unit got better down the stretch of the 24 season, and again, barring health, that should continue this year. Kalijah Kancey is consistently in the backfield, and there's been good reports from him in camp so far, and often with pass rush we talk about depth, and I do like the trio of Yaya Diaby, Hassan Reddick, and second-year pass rusher Chris Braswell. Lavonte David is Lavonte David. He's a high IQ linebacker that as soon as he retires, Jason Light might as well say to him, congratulations on being inducted into the team's Ring of Honor, and probably have your jersey number retired as well. He's still doing it at 35 years old, and sure, this may be the last ride, but he's still an above-average player, and like he has been throughout his entire career, though I think he is becoming more recognized, finally, he is one of the most underappreciated players in the NFL. If there is any weak spot in this defense, aside from picking a low-hanging fruit like corner depth, which you can pretty much say for every team, I would probably say it's the linebackers behind Lavonte David. Antoine Winfield Jr., when healthy, is one of the best safeties in football, and his 2023 season was tremendous. He was regularly all over the field, and I'm hoping he gets back to that player this year. And if 1 Antoine Winfield Jr. is good, 2 is probably better, as second-year DB Tyke Smith's game reminds me a lot of Winfield Jr.'s. He's a really good player and played nearly 600 snaps in the slot last year, and with a secondary consisting of guys like Winfield, Tyke Smith, Zion McCollum, Christian Izien, and Jamel Dean, again, the biggest thing is health. The best way to sit back and look at the 2025 Bucs defense when projecting how they're going to play is, where is the weakness? Who is a liability? And there really isn't one. This has to be prefaced with barring health, but they should have more edge rushing production, and they should force more turnovers this year, as they only forced 18 in 2024 after they forced 26 in 2023. They'll be better in nearly every facet, and their schedule is not difficult relative to other premier NFC contenders, and I think this unit will be a top 9 to 13 defense in 2025. The 2025 Bucs draft class is a perfect representation of who they are under GM Jason Light, drafting good football players and rock-solid players that should be there not just for a year or two, but really the next 4, 5, 6 years. And it started with the first-round selection of Ohio State receiver Emeka Egbuka. If you are a Bucs fan and not aware of his skill set or who he is as a player, I honestly think there's a pretty solid chance that you've seen him on your roster for the past 8 years, as I think he compares pretty favorably to Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin is a rock-solid player. He's a guy that, I don't want to have this come across as disrespectful, but he's a consistent 1,000-yard player. He's a guy that's going to move the chains. He's going to make big plays, but he's not on the level of the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases, and those players of the world, but he's still a really solid player, and that's who I think Ibuka is going to be. And throughout his Ohio State career, he played behind Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and now Jeremiah Smith, who is going to probably be the reincarnation of Julio Jones in a couple of years. That's not an exaggeration either, but Ibuka is a rock-solid number 2 receiver, and if Mike Evans still plays at the level he's playing at for the next year or two, and Chris Godwin's current health status is a little in question, so I do wonder how he's going to play in 25 and what his future with Tampa Bay is, but honestly, the player that Emeka Egbuka is, you've already seen him in Tampa Bay for the better part of a decade, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible, and that was a rock-solid, steady selection by GM Jason Licht. Now, I think there is a little, not cause for concern, but something that needs to be noted with their second-round corner in Benjamin Morrison, and that was the injury history, though I do want to add that he has been tremendous in training camp so far, so if he's already looking good in training camp as a rookie at 21 years old, then I would like to think that's going to translate to NFL games this fall, and that the hip injury is hopefully going to be a thing of the past, both for Benjamin's personal health and ultimately his NFL career. Benjamin Morrison allowed an opposing reception percentage of just 44.4% during his final year at Notre Dame, as he allowed just 12 receptions on 27 targets before his season was prematurely ended due to a hip injury. But like we've seen so far in camp, he has played well, and that hip injury looks to be a thing of the past, which is obviously a good thing. And the only thing that I really worry pertaining to the 2025 rookie impact for both Benjamin Morrison and third-round corner Jacob Parrish is having Zion McCollum, Jamel Dean, and Tyke Smith all in front of them on the depth chart, which obviously kind of log jams them in terms of how much they can actually play. But what I really loved about the 2025 Bucs draft, and if you guys were not aware, I gave the Bucs draft grade an A. There were not many teams to receive an A or an A+. I gave the Bucs draft grade an A, is they drafted good football players, and whenever you look at the secondary, like we just mentioned with the 3 corners above them, now we have 2 good rookie corners in Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish, who are both high IQ football players. And I really love the potential of Benjamin Morrison and think that he will eventually replace Jamel Dean. I just wonder how much he's actually going to play pertaining to the 2025 season. 26 and beyond, absolutely love him. I just kind of question how much rookie impact he's actually going to have this year, and it's because of the players above him on the depth chart. What I really liked from this class from GM Jason Licht was raising the floor now while also knowing that these players are going to contribute later. And unfortunately, 4th round selection David Walker from Central Arkansas was a player I absolutely loved in the pre-draft process, and whenever the Bucs made the selection, I actually tweeted that this was the definition of a draft steal. Unfortunately, David Walker tore his ACL and he is out for the 2025 season, but I really do like the idea of him coming in, and well, assuming recovery goes all right, and we of course are wishing David the best, both as a human being and as a football player. I really like the idea of him coming in as a designated pass rusher and being a rotational player on 3rd and 8+ whenever you need guys to get after the quarterback, especially in a Todd Bowles defense. And even for Elijah Roberts, who they selected in the pick in the 150s, I had him at player 105 on my big board. So whenever you look at Egbuka, Morrison, Parrish, David Walker, and Elijah Roberts, this was one hell of a draft class in terms of raising the floor for a team that already won their division, not just last year, but the previous couple of years, and is looking to take that next step into the postseason. The Bucs are a dangerous team, and their 2025 draft class was very underrated and underappreciated by the national media. The 2025 Buccaneers offense. I guess we should start by saying there's only so many good things you can say about a specific unit because, guys, this offense is absolutely loaded. They put up 500 points last year. Baker Mayfield, believe it or not, because the hype was not around him last year, it was around other quarterbacks. He finished tied for 2nd in the NFL with passing touchdowns as he threw 41 touchdowns during the 2024 season. They had 7 receivers have 300 or more receiving yards last year, and they dealt with their fair share of injuries throughout the year too. And for a team that dealt with their fair share of adversity, as long as they can stay relatively healthy and cut the turnovers down a bit, I don't see any reason to think that they're not going to be a fiery offense again in 2025. Now, 2 things that I want to address quickly about the Buccaneers offense. Tristan Wirfs is going to miss the first couple of games. Obviously, that is a tremendous loss. It is not an exaggeration to say this is a Hall of Fame player in his prime missing a couple of games. Now, the biggest thing for Wirfs is if there's any somewhat of a positive spin to it. You'd obviously rather have that happen now at the beginning of the year than late in January or late in December or early January, whenever you need him most. So hopefully Tristan misses those first couple of games and comes back and is healthy, and then we have a full healthy Tristan Wirfs for the remainder of the season. Now, we did mention Chris Godwin during the Emeka Egbuka part and the rookie impact, and one thing that I do want to clarify within the Chris Godwin is I'm not speculating about an injury or how a player is going to come back, as much as I wanted to note that he did sustain a major injury last year. But what I will say is this: the Buccaneers, a team that obviously has a hell of a lot more resources to Chris Godwin and access to his medical records and his personal recovery and everything else within that, his treatment, everything, they gave him a 3-year, $66 million contract this offseason. If there was any question about how they felt about Chris Godwin moving forward, they would not have gave him over $65 million to come play for them again for what is hopefully the next 3 years. But when you look at this offense, it's like you're naming good players. Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, like we just said, Emeka Egbuka. This offense is absolutely loaded, man. They finished top 10 in both passing and rushing DVOA last year. Bucky Irving, as a late round selection, had 1,500 total yards, and again, there's a reason they put up over 500 points in the first place. Now, one big thing that has to be noted with the Bucs is this will be Baker Mayfield's third offensive coordinator in 3 years with Tampa, as Liam Cohen is now the head coach of the Jags, and he's being replaced by Josh Grizzard. Josh Grizzard is a very intelligent man, as he went to Yale and then received a master's from Duke, and he spent several years with the Dolphins before becoming the Bucs passing game coordinator in 2024. But this is not a new guy entering the building for the first time, where he's walking up to Baker for the first time in April and saying, "Hey Baker, I'm going to be your new OC." This is obviously somebody that everybody is familiar with, and a guy that was very involved in meetings last year. And one thing that the Bucs did a really tremendous job of last year that I wouldn't see any reason why this wouldn't continue in 2025, especially considering the passing game coordinator from last year is now the team's play caller in Josh Grizzard, is they did a really good job of getting Rachaad White and Bucky Irving the football on screen passes. And it's not a coincidence that Rachaad White had 6 receiving touchdowns last year. They were really efficient at running the football, as they finished top 5 in yards per carry last year, but they also did a good job of getting the football in their running backs' hands while having the offensive line set up blocks downfield within the screen game. When you watch the 2024 Bucs offense after the bye, and honestly even before the bye, they just weren't winning a lot of games, they were a unit that was doing really well, and they were doing all of the little things right, especially after the bye. I mean, this is a team that went out and put up 40 plus points against the Chargers, against a team that led the NFL in scoring in points per game allowed. It's not a coincidence the Bucs had the success they had last year, and what I do think is unfortunate pertaining to the Bucs entering 2025 is they lost the wild card playoff game against Washington. I do think that the 2024 Buccaneers were one of the more talented teams to lose in the wild card round over the past 4 or 5 years, and I think that's a disservice relative to the hype that they are receiving entering the 2025 season because of how loaded this team is. Tampa also benefits from playing in the NFC South, as the NFC South is not the AFC West, where you have the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos, or the NFC North, where you have the Lions, Packers, and Vikings to deal with 6 times per year. Now, Tampa, like everyone, has tough games on their schedule, and the biggest thing is if they can survive those first 5 or 6 games, and if they can go 2-3 or even 3-2 in those first 5 games without Tristan Wirfs, or however long he's going to miss, as long as they don't start out 0-5 or 0-6 or anything crazy, which I don't think they will because this team is far too talented even without Tristan Wirfs, they're going to be fine. They do have one couple of game stretch during the back half of the season that's really brutal, as they go to Buffalo and at the Rams in consecutive weeks, but after the Rams game, they play home against the Cardinals, home against the Saints, at Carolina, at Miami, and then home against Carolina to finish the year. So there is a reality where the Bucs enter the postseason on maybe a 3 or 4 game win streak with another NFC South title. From a stat projection standpoint, I do think Baker will be over 4,000 yards again, and I do think he will come down from 41 passing touchdowns, as that's ridiculous to think anybody is going to have, or at least to predict that anybody's going to go back-to-back 40-plus passing touchdown seasons. But it's not unreasonable for him to throw 30 touchdowns this year, and it's not unreasonable for Bucky Irving to have 1,000 rushing yards as well as double-digit touchdowns. I also wanted to shout out Buc-ee's The Gas Station and the t-shirts that have Bucky Irving's head where the Buc-ee's logo is. Those are awesome. If I lived in Florida, I would definitely have a Buc-ee's t-shirt with Bucky Irving's head. Again, those are awesome. But for the rest of the offense, really outside of Mike Evans, I think he will have 1,000 yards, as he's had 1,000 yards in every season of his career. The biggest thing here is health, guys, because when you look at this receiving core of a healthy Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, and Emeka Egbuka, this is without a doubt one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. well. And again, barring health, then we'll see how they perform without Tristan Wirfs for the first couple of weeks. If they're not a top 10 unit this year, then it's a disappointing year for the 2025 Bucs offense. There's only so many ways you can say that this team is good because, again, they should be one of the better offenses in the league, and there's no reason to think that this team can't go to the NFC Championship game this year. They can compete with anybody. Now, I don't think they're going to go 16-1 or 17-0 or anything like that, and they're going to face their adversity, and you can certainly argue they already have by way of the Tristan Wirfs injury, but this team is going to be one of the most fun to watch on a week-to-week basis, and I do think they will win the NFC South, and repeat again, and that I think they will win a playoff game this year. I can't wait to see how the 2025 Bucs do, and I really think the sky is the limit for this team. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as we are closing in on 200,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.